Welcome to the Comstock channel. My name is Brianne Hendrickson. Today I have Matthew Kruse with us to talk about the 2023 and 2024 Brazil outlook. Welcome.
Hi, Brianne.
How are you?
Doing good.
So where are you at currently?
I'm in Brazil. I'm in the state called Minas Gerais. It's considered the southeast part of Brazil. It's maybe not as famous as Mato Grosso in some of those places. I kind of joke that it's maybe like the Ohio in or Indiana in the Corn Belt. It's they do produce some good crops here, but it's not as big of a production state as some of the others.
All right, so I'm going to let you go ahead and take the reins on this. You're going to do pretty much a presentation about Brazil and their outlook. So I'll let you go from here.
Yeah, thank you. I thought I'd try something a little different here and kind of put together more of an elaborate presentation. And I starting out here, I had a picture put together. We just had our farm party just last week, and we usually do a pretty nice Christmas party on the farm for all the employees, and that's a picture of everyone. So I don't, if you ever watched those read those book, Where's Waldo? I don't know if you can find me in all those people, but I am in there someplace, but amongst all those people. So our family has about 100 people or so on staff down here on the farm. But I titled this presentation El Nino Extremes because that's pretty much what's been having the biggest impact, I think, on the growing season down here is what's been happening with the rainy season. And so I'll let you take a couple seconds and show you the disclaimer. I always got to have these disclaimers on nowadays. So this is the town where I first lived in Brazil. People ask me a lot of times, have I seen a lot of progress made in the infrastructure in Brazil? And for the most part, not really, but it depends on what time frame I suppose you're talking in. And so if you look at a 30-year snapshot of the same region, you can see there has been quite a bit of growth in this town. And so I moved to Luis Eduardo about 2 years after this first picture was taken on the left. And so that's where I lived for over a decade. And so you can see what Luis Eduardo looks like today. It looks like a more modern, thriving city. And so there has been a lot of growth in the frontier areas. When we talk about soybean production, that's what I'm going to speak about here, starting out soybean production in the world. There's really only two places that matter for the most part. I suppose an argument could be made for third place, but nearly 80% of the world's soybeans are grown in the United States and Brazil. You can see there that Brazil is now the number one producer, and the U.S. is a close second, and then Argentina at 12%. Market share is a distant third, and so that's where most of the production is centered. And so all the other places in the world, they grow a little bit, but they really don't matter. And so when it comes down to the soybean trade, it's just between, for the most part, those two countries. In the case of soybean meal, Argentina matters a little bit more because they export so much soybean meal. So I put this video together. You can kind of see how the growth has changed in between the United States and Brazil in the last 30 years. So when I was a young lad back in the 90s, the USA had a pretty commanding lead over Brazil, producing 70 million metric tons. And really wasn't about until the early 2000s when Brazil's soybean production growth really started to take off and started to kind of narrow that lead. And so you kind of see it was around this 03, 04 when I first moved to Brazil. They were producing about 35 million metric tons. And whereas today they're projected, well, if you go off of what USDA has, they're projected to be at 160. I think they're probably going to end up a little bit less than that, but we'll get into that here in a little bit. So you can see here they're starting to really close the gap now. And it was really around the 2017, 2018 window when they finally surpassed the United States and moved into the number one spot. And really since then, they haven't looked back. They continue to grow. I think their average growth, over a 20-year period is around 3.5% to 4% a year. And so long-term growth like that. This is where we're at. So this is about a year outdated already. So, but that's kind of what's happened here in the last 30 years. So where we're at right now in the growing season, we're right here at the tail end, obviously, of December, coming up on Christmas right now. And so we're at the end of the planting window for soybeans, the end of the planting window for the first crop corn. And pretty soon we'll already be at the very early stages of harvest period for soybeans, for some of those earlier planted soybeans that were planted in September. Those already start to be they're already starting to harvest some now, actually. And so by January, that will start to pick up. And then, of course, immediately following the Brazilian soybean harvest, they begin on the second crop corn. And so that's what we're getting close to that period now where you start to see the second crop corn planting window get closer to us. And that's something that I think they're concerned about, is that's gotten pushed back quite a bit with a lot of the late soybean planting. That ideally they want to plant that second crop corn in that January and February period. And now it appears much less is going to get planted into that January period, and more is going to get pushed back into March, which puts it at a lot more risk as the rainy season starts to slow down in this April period already. I showed this chart last year. This El Nino that we're going through in Brazil has been very well forecasted. And so we've been talking about this for a while. And you can probably look up online or the video I did last year about the crop. And it's pretty much come exactly true as a lot of the general forecasts had predicted, that in El Nino years, you're dry to the north part of Brazil and you're very wet to the south. And that's pretty much the general tale for this season. Prior to that, it was the exact opposite with La Nina. But that's pretty much from the very beginning this season. That's what we've experienced, and that's what we're witnessing going on in the center west region, that rainfall levels are well below normal. And it appears that the El Nino is starting to peak now here, the very end of December, maybe early January. But that doesn't mean that this dryness is going to immediately go away anytime soon. I thought this one video was kind of interesting. This is pulled this off of TikTok. This is in the south central part of Mato Grosso, and the region is called Nova Mutum. And he's basically saying that they planted this in kind of late September, early October. And I mean, these soybeans should be completely green and covering the rows at this point. And the producer is basically describing how it's gone 40, 45 days without rain at this point. And he's kind of showing you what the beans look like. So, there's quite a lot of, they're not completely sure that it's even worth running the machine through some of that. But that gives you an idea of what some of those regions look like. And that was in a fairly representative. And so this is what the rainfall accumulation looks like over the past 3 months. You kind of see all the rain has really been centered in the southern part of Brazil. A lot of areas have gotten over 3 times what their normal amount of rainfall is. And so while the dry weather is hurting the north in these areas that we're talking about, I would argue that too much rain is hurting some of the yield prospects to the south. But this is essentially what this what the rainfall accumulation map looks like. This shows you what the kind of the subsoil moisture looks like compared from last year to this year. Argentina has had a rough go at the last 3 years. You can see how dry it was in the previous season. But it looked a lot better in Brazil last season. This is the same period of time now in 2023. You can see now to the lower part of the growing region in Argentina, it's still kind of dry in this Buenos Aires region, but it's gotten a lot better here in the Cordoba region right here. And then you can see all this blue in southern Brazil. Like they're just inundated, and there's a lot of flooding going on. And then that dryness in this is Mato Grosso right here, is a lot more red, a lot drier than what it was last year. This is what the crop prospects based off of CONAB, what they're looking for. Just under 112 million acres. It's about 3 million more acres than last year at this time. And so, even every year they just seem to add, 2, 3, 4 million acres. A lot of it's just going to depend on market prices, right? The more better the market prices are, the more they're going to expand. And even if the market prices are poor or not as good, they still might expand just at a slower rate. And so that's essentially what's been happening. And looking at the corn crop, the overall production of corn is still barely a third, or roughly a third of what it is in the United States. And so you might say, well, that's not, it's still a long ways off from competing with the United States, but they're not consuming as much corn in Brazil as we do in our own country in the United States. So a lot of the majority of that corn is being exported, and it's really heavily competing with our export market. And so that's really where that comes in, even though they're, and it's something, as the soybean crop expands, the corn crop expands with it, because a lot of those acres are coming from the center west, and they're double cropping on those as well. And so there are 3 crops in Brazil, and you can see the first and the third crop are fairly small. It's really all comes down to the second crop. That's the biggest one by far. I think it's roughly about 77% of their total production comes from that second crop on 40 million acres. And so, again, that won't begin planting until January and won't start to ratchet up until February. So we'll actually, I'll be in Mato Grosso with a group of Americans in late January, and we'll be able to see some of that corn crop going in and soybean harvest going out. This is the overall production history for the soybean crop in Brazil. You can kind of see this is roughly when I first went to Brazil down here, and now they've tripled the size of the crop or more since then. This is numbers a little bit out of date. USDA has already reduced this to 160. I think we've it's been 3 weeks now. Comstock reduced our estimate to around 155 million metric tons. And now just this week, it seems like we're hearing more and more private estimates also reduce theirs as well. And you're seeing a lot of estimates between the 153 to 156 million metric ton range. So I think you're going to continue to see further reduction in Brazil's crop. It doesn't mean it's a disaster crop or anything like that. I'm not suggesting that. But I think it has gotten hurt a little bit more than what the market is willing to admit. And the market's just kind of been trading sideways during this period, just not really acknowledging the dry weather that's going on. I don't think it really believed it. It wanted to see more confirmation. And now that it's starting to rain, the market has been moving lower. This is kind of interesting. You can see what the yield has done between the two countries in the last 20 or so years. And so both yields have increased. And on a couple of occasions, Brazil's average yield has actually outpaced that of the United States. And so they're very competitive when it comes to their soybean yields. And keep in mind that the U.S. yields are based on an average for, in the 85 to 90 million acre range. And they're getting these yields based off of 108 to 112 million acre range. Now, I don't know. I don't think they're going to get this 53.2 bushel per acre. That's what was originally projected. But I think they're going to lose several bushels off of that. But that's kind of what the preseason estimates were going into the year. Looking at total number of acres kind of shows you how the growth is compared for Brazil versus the United States. You can see that there's been a slight uptick in land growth for soybean acres in the United States, but it's fairly flatlined. It hasn't gone up that much, where you can obviously see there's a pretty strong uptrend going on in Brazil. And the question I get asked a lot is, how many more acres do they have for future growth? And there was actually a study done not that long ago that they thought there was enough pasture, good pasture land not talking about rainforest or anything like that. I'm talking about good pasture land of close to 80 million acres that could be converted to row crop production. So basically, we planted what was like 84 million acres this past season in the United States. So almost the entire U.S. acreage in the United States, that's how much potential they have for additional growth on just pasture land, good pasture. Now, if you talk about poor pasture land, then it's even more than that. But excluding rainforest and all that, so there's it's not positive news, but and it's going to take them a while. They're not going to do this all in a short amount of time. But I don't see this trend changing, unfortunately. I mean, they're going to continue to grow at 2, 3, 4% a year in their land acres just based off what commodity prices are doing. And again, this is what the production has done. You can kind of see in that 2017, 2018 period when Brazil's soybean production surpassed that of the United States. And you look at kind of the last, I don't know, what was that, almost 10-year period, the U.S. soybean production has really flatlined, at this 4.2 billion bushel level, where it's, they're approaching closer to 6 billion bushels in Brazil. This is where you've probably seen this map before. The USDA put this map together. This kind of breaks down where the production is coming from the country. We hear so much about, all this clearing and growth is happening in the Amazon. And that's not exactly true. This kind of shows, this is the Amazon basin up here. And that 6% of the soybean production in Brazil comes from that. Now, you wish it was zero, but it's not 50% or 70%, what the media might make you believe. It's 6%. But so most of the growth is really coming from this center west region here, Mato Grosso do Sul, and Goiás. That's these three states here. So that's the bulk of it. Now, historically, all the production was in the south. The south, their prominence has weakened in the last 20 or 30 years, where 60 or 70% of the production was in the south, and now it's only 30%, which is still significant. It's still significant contributor to the soybeans. But every couple of years, you see this center west region tick up and this southern part tick lower. And so in 10 years, this might be 50 or 55%, and this might be 25%. And so the growth is still moving north. That's where a lot of the pasture land is. You'll see this Maputo region in the northeast tick up as well. Soybean production by state, Mato Grosso. This is why Mato Grosso gets all the attention, because they're the 800-pound gorilla. They represent 27% of the entire country's total output. It'd be like having Iowa, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio combined. That's how big Mato Grosso is, and so you kind of see what the distribution there is. I thought this was kind of interesting. Put this together, kind of show what the profitability has done. It's fairly similar, I would say, to a Midwest grain farm, where a couple years ago they were making big money. The margins were excellent. And then that started to taper off last year, but still pretty good, historically. And now, as we enter the 23-24 period, we're starting to enter back into reality, I suppose, or what the long-term normal ranges were. I wish the normal ranges were that $300 to $400 per acre profit levels, but they're back in the $60 to $70 profitability range per acre. Which I suppose if you got 10 or 20,000 acres, maybe it's still okay. But if you got 80 acres, it doesn't go very far. So I wanted to point out biodiesel production in Brazil and what that's done. Looking at a longer term view, you can see how it continues to expand. In the COVID years, it kind of tapered off a little bit. A lot of that was, I think, them responding to they were able to get cheaper oil imported into Brazil, and so they temporarily reduced the biodiesel blend, but now they're going back the other way as oil's maybe gotten a little bit more expensive, and so they're actually, you kind of see what the biodiesel blend has done over the last several years, and so Next year, starting in March, they're going to increase that to 14%. And then the next year after that, 15%. Now, they can change this at any time, but this is a recent mandate that they just came out with. Now, why should we care about Brazil's biodiesel mandate back home? Because the more that they consume domestically in their own country means the less that they're going to export. And so since they are our number one competitor and the largest soybean exporter, we want them to export less and consume more domestically. And so we should be strong advocates basically for Brazil's biodiesel market. This is what their exports have done in Brazil. And you can see there's been massive growth there, almost tripling in the last 15 years or so. And so, these last couple years here weren't done yet. We haven't even started in 2024. I think what's going on right now with the crop in Mato Grosso, I think they'll have a hard time getting over 100 million metric tons. It's probably going to be back towards this 98 again, but it'll still remain elevated. So it'll be in that mid to upper 90 range for next year, just because they're going to have a slightly smaller crop than what they were originally projected. But you can kind of see how important China is to them. China is a very important ag commodity buyer to the United States, and that's no different than in Brazil. 2/3 of their exportable soybeans typically end up in China. As much as 50% or more of their exportable beef ends up in China. And now you're going to start to see a pattern where China is going to be buying more Brazilian corn as well. China has a much more notable presence in Brazil than you might notice in the United States. When you go through some of the frontier areas, you can see these Chinese symbols on grain elevators, which might be an odd thing to see in the United States. But you see this. This is COFCO's Chinese state-owned grain trader. And so they're actually going right to the source. They're buying the soybeans there in Mato Grosso and then shipping them out directly to their country. And so I showed this picture last year, and it's kind of interesting how you see that. So this shows what the Brazil's soybean export share has done between the last 30 years or so, where 2/3 of soybean exports belong to the United States, and now that's obviously shifted here, and possibly will continue on that trend. I don't know why this trend would change at this point, where you can see that eventually in the next few years, Brazil's probably going to get closer to 2/3 of the market share for the global soybean trade as they continue to expand. And so that's just what we've seen the last 30 years. So that's where we're at now.
All right, that'll do it for this episode. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Want more premium content? Subscribe to the Comstock Report, where you will receive 2 reports daily. Want more video content? We are on Facebook, YouTube, and now TikTok. So don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe.